Hello and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all the news from Star Citizen from the week just past. I am your host Mac, so let's get on with it. This week, the RSI Apollo was unveiled, new information on medical gameplay was announced, plus the latest ship shape showing progress on all ships currently in the pipeline was presented. So this week's Calling All Dev was specifically speaking to Mr. Todd Pappy. All the questions were directed to him, the first one being, will a solo player with a highly skilled NPC crew be able to compete with a highly skilled human crew? And he says yes, the NPC crews can be just as effective as long as the NPCs are of a good level. If you don't know, when you hire an NPC, they will be at a certain level. They can then be trained up in certain areas and become better. Obviously, the better they are, the more they will cost to hire. Anyway, next question. Will we have props like a grapple hook or a jetpack to help us move through rough terrain or even wrecks? Now, they have spoken about maybe using your EVA thrusters, stopping you after a long duration fall, kind of like a boost, but there's nothing been spoken about in terms of grappling hooks from games like Just Cause or Crackdown. Next question is, what is the status on getting ships from just blowing everyone up in one go to rendering them inoperable and needing repair? Now, currently they say the vehicle team is working on wear and tear, which includes misfires for components and weapons. Basically, if they take damage, instead of them just stopping working, it may affect him in other ways. They'll be, they'll work for a little bit and then have a bit of a brain fart and stop working and then start working again until they're repaired, as well as affecting other systems. But they need to get the physical entities inside the ships, which they said will be beginning soon. That means that then they can transfer the damage from the external into the internal components and it will render it inoperable. Next question is, when is Tier 0 of survival mechanics? So basically the very first implementation of survival, which includes water, food and hygiene. And they are currently implementing the character properties like thirst, hunger and sort of drunkenness and so on. Once they are implemented, they can then introduce food and eating, water and drinking, etc. We're likely, he says, going to see these come separately, so food will be first maybe and then water, or maybe the other way around. But they do need this setup for Squadron 42, so obviously that will probably push it quite quick. So final question, is there any development on the mechanic known as downed state from the old roadmap? This refers to being incapacitated rather than just being killed anytime you're shot too much. He says right now they're working on knockdowns, knockbacks and staggered hit reactions. They're implementing them right now, so that'll come soon. This will increase the time to kill. From there comes the medical aspect in terms of the med pen. So it's currently a full heal. In the future, it'll become a temporary heal, and you'll slowly depreciate until the next stage when they have the medical mechanics for ships and players, reviving people or hospitalizing people. So firstly, it's knockdowns. Then it's going to be the temporary heals versus permanent heals, and then from there it'll be medical ships and mechanics, which I just cannot wait for. Anyway, that was Calling All Devs, and I must say there was some really good questions, really good answers. Let's move on. So, kicking off around the verse, they first spoke about this Cryastro issue in a really well-presented in-law news production. I will show a little bit of this in the background, but do check it out for yourselves. Just talking about the current sort of piracy that's been going on around Cryastro, which is a nice touch. I'm glad that they did this. Kind of making light of it all. But on to what they've been working on. They've been implementing FPS AI into the PU locations. Recently, they have started to test NPC patrols around Security Post Korea, which is bringing a bit more of a robust law system into the PU and eventually making it a little more difficult for players to break the law or those wanting to rid themselves of the crimes, which I think will be a lot of fun testing that out. Flight system improvements are coming in 3.2.1. They're continuing to work on ESP to bring the most responsive and accurate dogfighting yet. Manned turrets are getting fine-tuned. This is based on community feedback. Basically, they're just going to gyro stabilize both the pitch and the yaw rather than just one, and reduce the dead zone, making it more functional. That's also coming in 3.2.1. Shop kiosks will be getting item previews, and also introducing the item previews into your VMA and PMA. Your VMA is your vehicle manager app, and your PMA is your personal manager app. Basically how you attach things to your ships or customize your character. Once this is ready, they'll introduce those images so you can see what you're actually adding to your characters and ships and whatnot. Now, they've talked about some of the impressive dev tools which will be eventually helping to get the rest of the PU star systems developed. One tool is the new construct system, which moves procedural construction from the Python programming language to C++. This improves the speed and maintainability and also allows them to create some really cool environments much quicker. They're already testing more layouts for the rest stop station, which we'll see around Stanton. This tool that we're talking about is actually replacing the procedural layout tool as seen in last year's CitizenCon, so the tools are very much evolving as the game does. Now looking again at the utilitarian housing for or the environment shown last week, they're putting in a bit more further details which will add to the story of the location. We also got to see some dents on the side of a huge hangar bay door, which they said will show the history of precarious takeoffs, which I'm 100% sure we'll all be able to add to. Props teams are finally giving hangars personality and visual narrative and consistency. You can see a little bit of what they've done just there. Now they're locking down the design of Hurston's 4 moons. We got to see Aberdeen, which is a rocky and uninhabited moon named after Aberdeen Hurston, who was accredited with designing the company's first antimatter warhead. They're testing the reusability of assets for the moon terrains, which it does kind of look a bit samey with a different colour palette, but they're also trying out different atmosphere settings to see what looks good and feels best, and I think that looks phenomenal. I can't wait to get different weather, or even just atmosphere without the different weather. Now the PU producers and devs are working together to figure out exactly where Hurston and its moons will sit within Stanton. This includes its relative distance to each other. They want to strike a balance between realism, functionality and fun. Space is big and they want to represent this, but they do want to avoid player frustration. So basically, how long will it take to go from one part to the next? They don't want to be too long that everyone gets bored and annoyed of it, but they want it to feel big, so it needs to have a certain timescale to it. Anyway, to finish off with, Shipshape is happening live now on RTV, which will have a couple of the developers who worked on these ships answering questions live. Obviously, they have revealed a new ship called the RSI Apollo, as you have already seen now, being Sunday, so do let me know your thoughts on this. I'm very excited to see this. And finally, Eric Kieran Davis is appearing on a panel at Comic-Con in San Diego. So on this week's Reverse the Verse, it was a bit of a ship shape, and they also took a look at the new RSI Apollo and medical gameplay, taking questions and just explaining a little more about the latest post and the Apollo itself. So starting with the ship shape, since 3.2's release, a new wave of ships are heading into the pipeline. The 300 series has begun its rework and is in the early white box, along with the Manu Defender and the 890 Jump. We also got to see a further look at the interior layout of the 890 Jump, so I'll show that in the background. They're just determining the ship's interior layout before heading into grey box. And do expect, he says, some additional updates as time goes on until its release in 3.5, which is the first quarter of 2019. Now the Freelancer variants, the Max, the Miss and the Dirt, are all in grey box modelling now. They're coming at the end of this year, which is 3.4. The F8 Lightning, unfortunately, has been put on hold, awaiting additional resources. The Mustang variants are in the final modelling stage. The Hammerhead is in its tech setup, and the 600i is also awaiting tech setup for resources to become available. So basically, what that means is they're waiting on staff to be able to free up basically and work on it. Now on to the main focus for the Reverse the Verse, which is the RSI Apollo. This is a new concept medical ship. The Cutlass Red is more of your ambulance, the Apollo is seen more as a clinic, and the Endeavour is your floating hospital. It can hold up to 6 patients, it's got a reception area, 2 med bays, a ramp and a rear airlock with cargo, and the bridge is separated with its own lift, toilet, food station and escape pods. I do like this idea of the reception, checking people in and then maybe coming to see your org mates. I don't know if that's how it's going to work, but I do kind of like that idea. It's got a crew of 2, a size 2 remote turret on the top, 28 standard cargo units, and it's 43 meters in length. Now, there was a shipyard post, if you haven't read it already, based on medical gameplay. I will do a completely separate vid on medical gameplay and how the Apollo fits in and some of the stats of it in a separate video sometime next week, hopefully early on, because I think that deserves its own isolated video. But on to the Q&A for the Apollo and medical gameplay. So the med bays in the Apollo are in the centre of the ship. These are mirrored either side. They're also modular, and you can have different levels of healing, which will also require different equipment. This is all in the medical gameplay post. Now you can have 3 beds on each side. This is a tier 3 setup. You can have 2 beds for tier 2, or you can have 1 bed for the tier 1 side of the medical stuff. So basically tier 3 is minor injuries, limb damage. Tier 2 is more serious injuries with multiple limb bleed outs or ruined limbs. And then tier 1 is your near death, fatal injuries. Basically, if you don't get help, they'll start ticking off your lives and you'll suffer some permanent effect after each death. You can have one tier 1 module and one tier 3 module, should you so want so. Or, you know, you can have tier 2, tier 3. You can swap them out individually, depending on what level of medical gameplay you want. The modules, they do say, are not provided with the first sale. They will come, you only get the tier 3 rooms, but they will figure out how to change them and provide them in the future. But I do like this idea, depending on how in depth you want to go. If you're only skilled at repairing minor injuries, you want to stick to the tier 3 modules. If you get a little more skilled at medical gameplay and helping people, then potentially you could go into a tier 1 and have just 2 tier 1 beds. It's up to you. Now, they also come with drone stretchers. They have 2 drone stretchers. These are controlled remotely or semi-autonomously. They basically, if they're autonomous, they find someone, but then the players may have to take control of them to maneuver these people back into the ship. They are designed to rescue injured people. When they're sent out, once they find someone, they encase the injured player, and it brings it back to the ship, and it's brought in underneath. Then it's filtered under the beds, and it comes up and reveals the player from underneath the bed, which allows the player allow them to assess the player and heal them. Now, the drone stretchers can also be pushed around planetside by players. They're not just in space, and there's plenty of space to maneuver the drone stretchers around inside the ship. So that's a real nice feature, and I can just see this all working together. Now, someone asked about what's the difference between the Apollo and the Cutlass Red? And why would you choose one over the other? Now, the Cutlass apparently only has 1 bed. I didn't realise that. The Cutlass Red, I thought, had 4 beds. I don't know if this varies depending on the modularity like we've seen with tier 1 to tier 3. It has more firepower than the Apollo, so it's better in combat situations. It is more of a combat ambulance, so it goes into hot zones of action and extracts the injured player. Basically, if you're in a fight and one of your teammates gets injured, you can call someone to come down in a Cutlass Red, provide some extra firepower, and take them out without being such a cumbersome ship. Now, the Apollo is more of a doctor's clinic. It's more to treat injured players over time rather than going into war zones. But the reason they pushed back the Cutlass Red is because they wanted to solve some medical gameplay questions before they began reworking it. So that's why it's taken a bit longer. Now, onto the Q&A. Why is the Apollo a medium-sized ship? And they felt that medium was the sweet spot for this style of ship. Not needing a lot of players to help, but enough to make a difference. Compared to the Cutlass, it's the same width, but the Apollo is much longer. Now, in terms of some quick stats, the Apollo's got 28 standard cargo units in a cargo hold at the rear of the ship. It's got a small lift at the front for the crew to directly enter the cockpit, a bit like the Constellation. There is a rear ramp, big ramp they say, leading to a separate airlock so you can open the doors and so forth. The speed of the Apollo triage is 205 meters a second and the medevac is 195. The triage comes with 2 size 2 laser cannons and medium armor, and the medevac comes with 2 size 2 miniguns and heavy armor. They've both got 2 shield generators, a large radar for scanning space for injured people, 2 toilets and 2 ejection pods and beds. Someone asked what ships can hold the Apollo, so if you're wanting to take it out but not make it your single ship, they fully intend it to fit within the hangar module of the Endeavour. It also has a docking collar, so you can dock it to other ships. But hopefully I would like to see the Idris being able to hold it, and definitely the Javelin. I would love to see that. But it is kind of a nice support vehicle should you get into trouble. Now, as some of you may have heard, the Endeavour was to be a floating respawn location. Is this the same for the Apollo? Now, this is very much in work in progress. Nothing is set in stone until they develop it further. But their thinking is any ship with a tier 1 bed can have this function. They did say, though, that the Cutlass Red is not likely to be able to hold one, but the Apollo and the Endeavour will. It does come with VTOL thrusters. It's got a crew of 2. The difference between the Apollo variants are basically just your armour, manoeuvrability and missiles. Someone said, can we get flashing red lights or ambulance lights? And they say they're not sure, but they would like them themselves. A bit like what we saw in the Avenger trailer. I would love to see lights on emergency vehicles and construction vehicles. That would be very cool. In terms of healing times, it's too early to say how long it will take someone to be revived, but this does depend a lot on what's happened to the person and the skill of the medic themselves. You should be able to fit a bike in the back in the cargo hold, but I don't know why. The quantum speed is the same as you would expect other ships with medium quantum drives. There's nothing specifically faster about it. And when it comes to can you kidnap people with the drones and willingly, at this point, no. The player that you're trying to get needs to be immobile. I'm not sure how that's going to work. Maybe you can knock them out and put them on a drone bed. I don't know. But yeah, that's the whole of RTV. As I say, I will do a separate video this next week on the medical gameplay and the Apollo and just how it's all going to feel and work together and what I'm looking forward to about it. But let me know your thoughts on that. Are you excited for medical gameplay? Do you own an Apollo now? Or couldn't you care less? Anyway, let's move on. Also this week, there was a new discovered post titled Scraping By, which follows a Vulture test pilot as he discovers an ancient Taveran wreck, plus the latest Shipyard post highlighting medical gameplay now and for the future was released, which I will cover in a video next week. So that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a video. Hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed it and share the video with all your friends. If you like what I do and want to help me make it better, follow the link below to my Patreon page to learn more.